Hadi, and welcome to today's talk. I'm Nyree Hazelton, as Tyra had said. I have been with CSFS for 6 years as a community clinician, predominantly working on the South Side and the Burns Lake area and surrounding areas. I hold a bachelor's degree in family studies and childhood development, a master's degree, and I also hold a master's certificate in complex trauma and child sexual abuse intervention. This is what allows me to talk today with you about the biological effects of trauma. So before we start, I'm going to start with a quick quote that I think kind of will resonate throughout this whole talk today. And so the quote is, "Trauma is not what happened to us, trauma is what is happening inside us." And so as we further the discussion, you'll start to see why this quote is so significant. So let's start. So life is hard, it's supposed to be. Although we would never wish suffering on anyone we love, without it, we would never develop the confidence to overcome adversity. We would never learn how to heal, and thus to be useful to ourselves and others. Many of us, however, experience especially difficult challenges, whether it be abuse, neglect, or living in a troubled home. Toxic stress of adverse childhood experiences affects every community. If unresolved, it imprints and changes the brain, biology, and sense of self in ways that can affect our well-being throughout our lives and even from one generation to the next. So before we start into the real biological aspects of the trauma, we're going to go over some terms everybody has a pretty complete understanding. So what is trauma? In general, trauma can be defined as a psychological, emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. When loosely applied, this trauma definition can refer to something upsetting, such as being involved in an accident, having an illness or injury, losing a loved one, or going through a divorce. However, it can also encompass a far extreme, including experience such as severely being tortured or raped. Because events are viewed subjectively, the broad trauma definition is more of a guideline. Everyone processes a traumatic event differently because we all face them through the lens of our prior experiences of our life. Because trauma reactions fall across a wide spectrum, psychologists have developed categories as a way to differentiate between the types of trauma. Among them are complex trauma, or sometimes referred to as complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or usually referred to as PTSD, and developmental trauma disorder. So complex trauma happens repeatedly and repetitively. It often results in a direct harm to the individual. The effects of complex trauma are cumulative. The traumatic experience frequently transpires within a particular time frame and within a specific relationship, and often within a specific setting. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, can develop after a person has been exposed to a terrifying event, or has been through an ordeal in which intense physical harm occurred, or they were threatened. Sufferers of PTSD have persistent and frightening thoughts and memories of this ordeal. Developmental trauma disorder is a recent term in the study of psychology. This disorder forms during a child's first 3 years of life, the result of abuse, neglect, and/or abandonment, Developmental trauma interferes with the infant or child's neurological, cognitive, and psychological development. It disrupts the victim's ability to attach to an adult caregiver. An adult who inflicts developmental trauma usually does not do this intentionally. Rather, it happens because they're unaware of the social and emotional needs of a child. Out of research, we have discovered that adverse childhood experiences have a direct correlation to one's physical health. With that stated, we know that traumas that occur later in life also have the potential to cause physical, emotional, and psychological effects in a person's well-being. So what is the difference between good stress and bad stress? Because that is the variant of which makes something traumatic. Each of us have usually experienced the 3 kinds of stress. Good stress, or sometimes referred to as eustress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Each can cause us to stretch and grow, but toxic stress presents unique challenges, especially in childhood. Good stress challenges us without overwhelming us. We are under control emotionally and tend to make good decisions. Think of a student who's prepared for an important exam or prepared athlete training in a competition. The stress response to flight or flight is brief, and the levels of stress hormones are very appropriate. Tolerable stress might involve intense fight or flight physical changes with a greater shift in stress hormones. However, the body eventually returns to normal, especially if a trusted adult can help a child buffer the stress. Recovery occurs before there is a lasting physical or psychological damage. For example, you might think of a death of a loved one or a natural disaster in which a community is coming together. That would be more of tolerable stress. It's still stressful, but you have the framework in which you can go through the process of relieving the trauma. So toxic stress is so overwhelming and so severe or chronic that a person ends up being like almost in shock. Sometimes we call it shaken up. And this usually is stressed for a very long time as well. In kind of stress adversely affects the brain and biology in ways that impair adults' health, work performance, relationships, judgment, impulse control, spirituality, self-esteem, and especially if there's an absence of a buffer or an adult to help with the stress. The effects of toxic stress can be passed down intergenerationally if unchecked, and we also refer to that as called epigenetics. This brings us to the fascinating line of research regarding toxic stress in early life. This research was called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, and this was the brainchild of two medical doctors by the names of Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda. They actually examined 17,000 medical records of everyday patients at a health maintenance organization and found that there are 10 commonly reported childhood stressors that could predict a wide range of psychological, medical, and functional problems. And now I'm going to list what these contributing factors are. So we know that there are 3 kinds of abuse. There's sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. There's 2 kinds of neglect, which is physical neglect and emotional neglect, and 5 kinds of household dysfunction. So parents who have been divorced or separated, witnessing a mother or a stepmother being threatened violently, a household member being addicted to alcohol or other drugs, a household member who is mentally ill or suicidal, and a household member that has been in jail. So we're going to go into further detail about all that as the talk continues. But I think what we'll do right now, since that was a little bit heavy, we're just going to take a quick little pause, and I'm going to do a little 1-minute meditation with everyone. These are kind of skills that will help counteract stressful events. So there's just things that are really good for your general health. So I'd like everyone to take a deep breath. So breathing in through your nose and exhale through your nose. Breathing in again, feeling your lungs expand. And breathing out, feeling a sense of letting go. Breathing in to feel your body getting fuller. Breathing out to release the tension. Breathing in, feeling alive and awake. Breathing out, feeling your muscles relax. Breathing in, feeling a sense of fullness. And now breathing out, letting go of unnecessary tension. Okay. So now, in order to make sense of the next part of the conversation, we're going to start getting more into the physiological aspects of trauma within your body. I'm going to kind of start discussing this central nervous system a little bit more in depth. So the vagus nerve is the largest cranial nerve in our body, and it attaches to the base of our brain here at the base of our skull. It then extends throughout our whole body, connecting all of our organs and then wandering throughout our entire body. The vagus nerve takes all the stimulus from our body and relays it to our brain. The vagus nerve is essential for our well-being and in all aspects. This is why when you're working with a trauma therapist, our main focus and goal is always to calm and tone your vagus nerve. And so you'll see why as we continue. So what is the function of the vagus nerve? The primary role of the vagus nerve is to carry information from our inner organs, including our liver, heart, lungs, and gut to the brain. Some of the major functions are it controls anxiety and depression. It increases our stomach's acidity, digestive juices and secretion and gut flow, increases the release of histamine by our stomach cells, controls heart rate and blood pressure, controls blood glucose, helps release your bile from your gallbladder and to get rid of toxins and break down fats. It promotes kidney function by improving blood filtration and excretion of minerals. It regulates your appetite and regulates your immune system and it controls inflammation. So it's important for all aspects of our life, this one major nerve, our vagus nerve. So now we're going to start getting more into like the trauma sequencing. So the sequence of trauma reactions. So survivors' immediate reaction in the aftermath of a trauma are quite complicated and are affected by their own experiences. The accessibility of natural supports, healers, their coping and life skills, and those of immediate family, and the responses of the larger community in which they live. Although reactions range in severity, even the most acute responses are natural in response to manage trauma. They are not a sign of psychopathology. Coping styles vary from action-oriented to reflective and from emotionally expressive to withdrawn. Clinically, a response style is less important than the degree to which coping efforts successfully allow one to continue necessary activities, regulate emotions, sustain self-esteem, and maintain and enjoy interpersonal connections. Indeed, a past era in traumatic stress psychology, particularly regarding group and mass traumas, was the assumption that all survivors need to express emotions associated with the trauma and talk about the trauma. More recent research indicates that survivors who choose not to process their trauma are just as psychologically healthy as those who do. The most recent psychological debriefing approaches emphasizes respecting the individual's style of coping and not valuing one type over another. So one thing absolutely for sure is that when you are specifically in a trauma session with a trauma therapist, if we have a client who wants to discuss a past trauma, we keep it very, very brief. And there's a reason for it, is that we don't want our clients going, once they start going back into those emotions, all those emotions from that event come forward. So in trauma therapy, we're always keeping the retelling of stories very, very short and very, very brief, and then making sure that our clients are contained and safe after a session. So that's just one thing. If you are doing trauma therapy with people, that's why it's so short usually. We're always limiting the amount of the story to keep you regulated and keeping your vagal nerve toned and just so that you're in control. So trauma can affect one's beliefs about their future by a loss of hope, limited expectations about life, fear that life will end abruptly or early, or anticipation that normal life events won't occur, such as accessing education, the ability to significant and committed relationships. Initial reactions to trauma can include exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, dissociation, confusion, again, I have confusion twice, sorry, physical arousal, and blunted effects. Most responses are normal and that they affect most survivors and are socially acceptable, psychologically effective, and self-limited. Indicators of a more severe response include continuous distress without periods of relative calm or rest, severe dissociation symptoms, and intense intrusive recollection that continue despite a return to safety. Delayed responses to trauma can include persistent fatigue, sleep disorders, nightmares, fear of recurrence, anxiety focused on flashbacks, depression, avoidance of emotions, sensations, or activities that are associated with a trauma, even remotely. Physical responses to trauma. So the diagnostic criteria for PTSD place a considerable emphasis on the psychological symptoms, but some people who have experienced traumatic stress may present initially with physical symptoms. Thus, primary care may be the first and only door through which these individuals seek assistance for trauma-related symptoms. Moreover, there are significant connections between trauma, including adverse childhood experiences and chronic health conditions. Common physical disorders and symptoms include somatic complaints, sleep disturbances, gastrointestinal and cardiovascular, neurological, musculoskeletal, respiratory, and dermatological disorders, urological problems, and substance use disorders. So what is exactly somatization? Somatization indicates a focus on bodily symptoms or dysfunction to express emotional distress. Somatic symptoms are more likely to occur with individuals who have traumatic stress reactions, including PTSD. People from certain ethnic and cultural backgrounds may initially or solely present emotional distress via physical ailments or concerns. Many individuals who present with somatization are likely unaware of the connection between their emotions and the physical symptoms that they're experiencing. At times, clients may remain resistant to exploring emotional content and remain focused on the bodily complaints as a means of avoidance. Some clients may insist that their primary problem are physical, even when medical evaluation and tests fail to confirm ailments. In these situations, somatization may be a sign of mental illness. However, various cultures approach emotional distress through a physical realm or view emotional and physical symptoms and well-being as one. It is important not to assume that clients with physical complaints are using somatization as a means to express emotional pain. It may be a specific condition or disorder requiring medical attention. Furthermore, counselors need to refer to medical evaluation if this is what's presenting in your case. Trauma, if not managed, can also impact our physical health years after it has occurred. So what is actually occurring in our bodies during traumatic stress? The physiological effects of trauma are: traumatic stress sensitizes something called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the body's central stress response system. You can think of this as the intersection of your central nervous system, your endocrine system, and your vagal nerves. They're all kind of encompassed together. Because trauma impacts the HPA axis, it can affect your hormones, especially adrenaline, cortisol, and oxytocin. Trauma makes us more reactive to stressors and more likely to increase the stress hormone cortisol. In certain situations, hormones like cortisol are very important. Think if you're being chased by a wild animal, adrenaline kicks in to help you get out of dangerous reach. But when there's no activity and there's no danger, and trauma keeps your body revved up in a revved up state, this ends up putting a lot of mileage on your body. So I don't know if that made sense. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that if a traumatic, if you're staying within a traumatic response for too long, this is really, really harmful on our body. Cortisol then becomes very toxic when it's chronically high, ultimately leading to an increased risk of health conditions such as depression and heart disease. Once a stressor is removed, the body's hormones should respond in kind. The only problem is a body that is exposed to trauma long-term will continue to produce these hormones, which may lead to negative long-term effects on the body. This puts you at a higher risk of anxiety, depression, heart disease, sleep disruption, weight gain, and memory and concentration damage. Trauma also reduces the release of oxytocin, which is our love hormone, which promotes sociability. It also contributes to the relationship and bond between mother and child, or relationship between romantic partner. Early traumas in childhood decreases oxytocin levels in the brain, and this therefore affects the receptors in childhood and later in life. And this is where we might see a difficulty with attachment between mother and child. Oxytocin is responsible for mood boosts. While working as a protective buffer against stressors, having low levels of oxytocin could mean less protection and adaptability. So meaning we'd have less movement within our emotions. Trauma can also lead to increased and long-term inflammation, which is an immune response to foreign invaders and damaged tissues. While inflammation is good for a short term, it is the main culprit between heart disease and autoimmune disease if it is a chronic issue. The physical and emotional pain of trauma can also lead to unhealthy habits like smoking or drinking to numb emotions, or overeating as a way of self-comforting. The famous Adverse Childhood Experiences study found that as someone's quantity of traumatic experiences increased, so did the chances of engaging in negative health behaviors such as smoking or drug use and other addictive behaviors such as promiscuous sex or gambling. There's a number of addictive behaviors. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper into the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, once again, is the longest cranial nerve and the most complex of the 12 cranial nerves. Vagus is Latin meaning wander, which accurately represents how the nerve wanders all over our body and various organs. The vagus nerve is also a key part to our parasympathetic nervous system, which is also sometimes is referred to as our rest and digest. It influences breathing, digestive function, heart rate, and all of which can then have a huge impact on our mental health if unregulated. Polyvagal theory emphasizes the evolutionary development of two systems: the parasympathetic nervous system, which is ultimately connected to the vagal nerve, and the sympathetic nervous system. Each has its own function and cause the body to react differently before, during, and after a traumatic or stressful event. If these two systems become damaged from excessive or recurrent trauma, a breakdown occurs and mental illness such as complex trauma or anxiety disorders may result. The sympathetic nervous system gets the body ready for your fight, flight, or freeze response. With the fight or flight response, the sympathetic nervous system begins revving up the heartbeat and blood pressure and stealing blood from the body to make muscles ready to run. If there is nowhere to run and no hope of escape, the sympathetic nervous system will cause a person to freeze or collapse. These are both forms of dissociation. The parasympathetic nervous system is a calming force that, when kicked in, allows the heart rate and blood pressure to lower and calming down the body after a traumatic event. If the sympathetic nervous system is hyperaroused, then the body suffers from a lack of adequate blood supply, as a person is always ready to flee or fight. This damages the person's ability to calm down after being triggered, and sometimes that even barely resembles danger that damaged their sympathetic nervous system. If the parasympathetic nervous system does not kick in appropriately, the body suffers because blood pressure can suddenly drop, leading to fainting and other physical problems. The leading cause of damage to the nervous system is the overwhelming and chronic washing of the brain by stress hormones brought on by severe and repeated childhood traumas. Stress hormones are notoriously known to damage a child's brain, including the vagal nerve and both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Clearly, adverse childhood experiences encompasses also intergenerational trauma, personal trauma, complex trauma, and may result in a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The more ACEs a child experiences, the more likely they are to have damage to their parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. The difference in the symptoms of sympathetic versus parasympathetic damage. So as one can imagine, there are many side effects to having damage to either of the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's break it down. So the sympathetic nervous system, if there's damage there are many natural effects that the sympathetic nervous system has in the body when triggered, which are including the following: sensing a threat and freezing to scan for danger, releasing cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and other stress hormones to prepare a body for fight or flight, feeling angry, afraid, or very anxious, digestion and other bodily functions considered non-essential slow and allow the body to rush allow blood to rush to the muscles. The need to run away, hit something, or react physically in some way become overwhelming, and the senses become focused and very hyper alert. When these reactions become chronic due to childhood trauma, sensing a threat becomes sensing a perceived threat because of their past events. The person will release stress hormones in response to this perceived threat, just as if they were in the real one, and become angry, afraid, or filled up with anxiety. The immune system and digestive system shut down to make more blood for the muscles so that you can run away, and we might react by wanting to hit something or someone. Our senses remain in a state of constant hyper alertness and ready for the next trigger to happen. So what this is saying is, this might demonstrate as a person who's always like very, very hyper aroused. They're overwhelmed. They have chaotic thoughts. They anger really, really easy. They're quite aggressive. And that would sometimes be a symptom of a damaged sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system damage. The job of the parasympathetic nervous system is twofold. So it calms us down after a fight, and it also will keep us in a freeze state to help us survive so we can fight again or flee again. When the parasympathetic nervous system is damaged by childhood traumas, either or both the function mentioned above breaks down, leaving the person with the following problems: feeling of numbness, dissociative, hopelessness, shame, trapped or disconnected, spacing out, greatly decreased heart rate, low blood pressure, an enhanced sexual arousal, and lowered immune system responses. They have difficulty finding words. There's a loss of awareness, inability to consolidate memories properly, and a lowered ability to feel pain. Many survivors who have damaged parasympathetic nervous systems dissociate and have problems with we call it spacing out. They may be ill more than other people because their immune system is compromised. They have trouble finding the appropriate words to express how they're feeling and experience a lack of self-awareness. Survivors often have memory problems and experience a lowered ability to experience pain, which can be quite dangerous because pain is initially what tells us if we're injured, right? So we actually do want to be able to feel pain. That's quite important. So I've done a lot of talking about the central nervous system, the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system. So the question was, what are the biological effects of trauma? And so here, now I'm going to describe a list of medical conditions that are actually linked to trauma and adverse childhood experiences. So obesity is at the top of the list, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, including heart disease and stroke, cancers, pain, autoimmune diseases, so rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, lupus, psoriasis, celiac disease, IBS, and Graves' disease. So the autoimmune disease would be mainly linked to a breakdown in the parasympathetic nervous system. Fibromyalgia is another one, chronic fatigue, hepatitis. Nearly all sleep disorders are associated with trauma, and productive problems and ulcers. Under the mental health aspect of health, our leading issues would be low self-esteem, depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, complex trauma or complex PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, that's the long list. So now we're gonna have some good news. So how do we mitigate trauma's impact on our body? Unfortunately, trauma is part of life, and we all know that. We're all always experiencing stuff that it isn't happy or healthy. So by focusing on a healthy lifestyle and taking care of ourselves sends a message to our body that we are safe, that we're nourished, and that we can help ourselves reset. So one of the things we like to suggest is engaging in joyous oxytocin increasing activities. So we recommend regularly participating in activities that can help balance your hormones. So you can mitigate trauma-induced body responses by engaging in activities that increase oxytocin and decrease cortisol. For example, hugging people or pets, engaging in compassionate behaviors, laughing, sometimes even having a warm, relaxing bubble bath. These are all very, very healthy ways and ways that help increase oxytocin levels. In my practice, one of the things that I do is that I work with weighted blankets for my clients. So once again, that helps my clients to feel grounded, but it also will increase the release of oxytocin. Another thing that to mitigate the impacts of trauma on our body is decrease your cortisol levels with mindfulness and meditation. We suggest that embracing mindfulness meditation, which can actually cause beneficial changes in the brain structure and the neurochemical release. This is because what it does is it triggers our body's relaxation response. In fact, in 2018, in the psychiatry research, found that mindfulness meditation decreased inflammation as well as biological stress reactivity while improving resilience to stressors. The study had participants engage in breath awareness, body scanning, and a gentle hatha yoga. One easy way to implement mindfulness meditation to your day, to your daily routine, I should say, is by downloading. There's a couple of apps. I like Calm and Headspace. Those are quite good. And another one named Breathe. What they'll do is they will literally guide you through a mindfulness meditation. If you don't want to add those apps, you can also just simply turn on a timer for 10 minutes or 5 minutes and just focus on a calm breathing. So just focusing on your inhale and your exhale. And one of the really important things to realize is that it's actually the exhale. The longer the exhale, the more of a effect it has on creating vagal tone. So exhale is really what we want. So you can just do that. You could put on a timer, sit there, really focus on your breathing. When you get distracted, come back to the breath and then stop once your timer goes. One thing we also really suggest is just advocate for yourself. It's important that you understand that trauma does affect you, and that if you're feeling really constantly run down and you're constantly sick and you're chronically under the weather, it's a really good idea to just kind of advocate for yourself, go to your doctor and just kind of say, like, I think I need some extra help, especially if you've been in a traumatic event recently. So what are some other ways that we can repair and normalize our nervous system and our brains? And one thing that we're finding more and more research around is that taking care of your brain. And so I'm going to go through some things that really, really help take care of your brain. Not only take care of your brain, but they can also help develop your brain and help areas of your brain grow as well. So most of us do not fully realize how the physical conditions of our brain profoundly affects our emotional well-being and our ability to heal from trauma. If we did, we'd undoubtedly maintain our brains like we do our houses and our homes, right? So researchers have discovered that there's 10 ways that we can strengthen our brain. Typically, they say in matters of weeks, but it depends on how consistent you are with this stuff. The 10 ways work together to improve the size, the health, and functioning of your brain regions. They regulate emotions, they improve thinking and process memories so that they can be stored and retrieved in a calm and rational manner. In addition, these steps, they promote growth of neurons and neural pathways. And that's really important. So what do you think the 3 daily things that you can do to really promote brain health? So the big 3, we call it, is nutrition, sleep, and exercise. So nutrition, so studies consistently support the conclusion that Mediterranean style eating optimizes brain health and function. So if you take a look, if you're just thinking of a plate right now, as we're talking, your plate would be predominantly full of plant-based foods, so vegetables. So I'm talking about like fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and herbs, but no salt. Fish and other seafoods would be a portion of your plate, not predominantly. Wouldn't be the largest amount. The vegetables would be the largest amount. And then poultry or eggs. So dairy, including yogurt, feta, and mozzarella, and then fermented foods such as, again, yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented cheeses really, really help support a really healthy microbiome in your gut. So foods, these are really cool. These are foods that decrease anxiety, and then you can add to your diet. And so these are pumpkin seeds, berries, avocado, spinach, Swiss chard, chia seeds, hemp seeds, oats, turmeric, dark chocolate, Brazil nuts, and chickpeas. So those foods that I just explained, if you can add them into your diet, they will help reduce anxiety for sure. Another thing that's extremely important is staying hydrated, and hydrated with water. So a relatively small loss in bodily fluid can actually really, really disrupt mood and mental functioning. So therefore, drinking at least, I guess it's 8 glasses of water a day to minimize, will help keep an optimal brain functioning. Another way to make sure that you're drinking enough water is to check your urine. It should be either clear or kind of like a light yellow. And if it's darker than that, you should start intaking some more water. That will help boost your mood. So hydration is key to brain function and mood regulation. And then our last one of the top 3 is sleep. So most adults are like actually sleep deprived. So falling well short of 7 to 8 hours or more required for optimal mood and brain functioning. Sleep deprivation is a huge stressor, causing increase in cortisol secretion. We don't want that. Excess cortisol secretion in turn causes symptoms of stress, depression, and anxiety. Sleep deprivation also results in brain's emotional centers becoming 60% more activated. Thus, if you're feeling stressed, agitated, anxious, or down, take care of your sleep needs. Sometimes even just getting an extra 20 to 30 minutes of sleep per night can have a huge influence on your mental health. So how do we get sufficient amount of sleep? So one of the things we want you to strive for is regularity, meaning go to bed and get up at the same time. So what this does is it helps strengthen your sleep cycle in the brain, which then what actually starts happening too as we get older, that sleep cycle actually gets weakened. So we really want to have a real regimented bed at this time, wake up at this time. And it just really kind of strengthens that within your brain. The next thing is like sleep quality, right? So that's the third factor. And light in the hours before bed, especially blue light from electronics, actually disrupts the natural sleep cycle and suppresses melatonin, where if you get up early in the morning and you're exercising in the sunlight, what that does, it actually helps solidify your sleep schedule. So try turning down the lights or turning off all electronics before bed. Instead, wind down with like a book, meditation, a warm bath, anything without the blue light. And we also, like a general rule is to avoid eating 3 to 4 hours before bed because digestion will override sleep. So sometimes you'll notice that if you're in a session, your therapists are like, well, what's your sleep hygiene like? Because it really, really impacts your mood. The next is exercise. As we all know, moderate exercise improves mood and reduces stress, anxiety, and depression. The neuroscience behind exercise is that anxiety and depression actually create inflammation within your body. So actual walking and body movements is a natural inflammatory. So if you can get 30 minutes of just walking every day, that's fantastic. What are our other 7 strategies for caring for our brain? Because we said there's 10 pathways, right? So treat medical conditions. So certain and common medical conditions can impair brain function. Therefore, if you have underlying conditions, actively treat them with your medical professional. For example, depression is also linked to elevated cholesterol levels. So once again, like mind, body, and spirit are all connected, and we don't want to just be focusing on one aspect of that. Minimize pesticides, pollutants, and preservatives. So many chemicals in our environment are neurotoxins. So preservatives found in processed foods and pesticides on our vegetables and stuff. So really, really wash your vegetables. If you can, grow your own, and try and limit processed foods will really help as well. Maintaining oral health. So treat and prevent gum disease to prevent toxins from entering your bloodstream, and which then cause inflammation. So brush and floss daily and see professionals regularly for checkups. Expose yourself to sunlight and nature. Sunlight is so important for our natural vitamin D, and nature has an automatic calming and grounding effect. So get out in nature every day, garden, walk in the trees, put your feet on the grass, go to a body of water and, put your toes in the lake. One of the things, walking in bare grass or walking barefoot in grass is really, really good for you too. Nature is a natural medicine, and we know that. So really we stress getting outside and being in the sun and getting out into nature. Not only that, you're usually moving your body too, right? Which is an anti-inflammatory. So we've talked about the brain, but then one of the largest aspects of trauma and the effects on our body is located with our vagus nerve, right? So we're going to talk about vagus nerve stimulation. So there are several simple exercises you can use to increase your vagal tone and the communication between your internal organs and your brain. So one is cold exposure. So we're winning up here in the north. Exposure to cold temperature can activate your parasympathetic nervous system and stimulate the vagus nerve by shifting blood volume to your core. In fact, many studies have shown that immersion in cold water or even putting your face in cold water is an effective way to increase the parasympathetic nervous activity. Sometimes that's a tool that I use too with clients. If they're noticing that they're being triggered, is I just tell them to go to the bathroom, splash some cold water on their face, or really focus on washing their hands in cold water. That then flicks on the parasympathetic nervous system and starts to tone their vagal nerve, which then gives us them a calming effect. 2, singing. Singing, humming, chanting, these activate the sympathetic nervous system, and the vagus nerve is actuated, and the muscles in your throat and your neck and your lungs help to tone your vagal nerve. Yoga and exercise, like we were just talking about, but studies have shown that yoga and exercise increase vagal nerve activation through the parasympathetic nervous system. Lifting weights, high intensity interval training, and walking are very, very beneficial for your brain and vagal nerve health. Deep breathing and slow breathing. So what that does is it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system by stimulating the vagus nerve, and therefore helps relieve symptoms of depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. Socializing and laughing, like we had said, so that leads to increased positive emotions, which then produces increased vagal tone. Probiotics. Research is beginning to show that the vagus nerve is highly influenced by bacteria, fungus, and other microbes in our gut biome. So having healthy gut biome, healthy gut microbiome is essential for healthy vagus nerve functioning. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential fat that your body cannot produce itself. So found primarily in fish and are necessary for our normal electrical functioning in our brain and nervous system. They're essential for brain health and have shown to help people overcome addiction and reverse cognitive delays, which is pretty good. Choline. So acetylcholine is the main vagal neurotransmitter, and what it does is it assists in the inflammatory cytokinesis, and what it does is it improves the memory and focus. So choline is an amino acid, and it is a precursor, and it is needed to make acetylcholine. It's involved in numerous key reactions, including muscle control, memory, and the mediation of emotions and behavior in the brain, and all due to its effect on the vagus nerve. So plant foods that are especially high in choline include tofu, soy milk, broccoli, and cooked dry beans, quinoa, peanuts, and mushrooms. Again, these kind of foods that I just mentioned are linked to a Mediterranean diet. And then massage. So this is kind of cool. So then the vagus nerve can be stimulated by massage. So there's a couple specific areas, one on the body, one being the foot. So foot massages or reflexology has been shown to increase vagal tone and heart rate. Also, massaging is the carotid sinus is right here. And you can massage, literally, you can massage like this down your throat here and down your throat here. And if you do that, they say to do it about 3 times each side. And what it does, it will actually help with vagal tone, and it will, again, help with the calming aspect. So that is kind of the talk. So now I'm just going to go over some tools for self-care. So deep breathing, we've gone over that a couple of times. Meditation is another one. Grounding. So right now, if I was going to have clients ground, what I would do is I'd ask you to really notice your bum in the chair, notice the places of contact on your body. Another way to ground, we call it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, in which what we would have you do is you would name 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can see, 5 things you can touch, and then go 4, 3, 2, 1. And in stating, like, you'd use grounding if you're feeling like hyper aroused, if you're just kind of feeling anxious. These are ways to kind of bring you back and bring you back into present. That's what grounding is doing. It's bringing you back into present. So you're present. You're not thinking of the past. You're not thinking too much of the future. We said meditation. Another thing that I really like to do with clients is have them have anthem songs, right? So as we know, you can be either elevated or you can be a little lower. What we want is we always want people to be called in the window of tolerance. And so we want you to be here where you can just go about your day feeling calm and regulated, right? And even if you start to come up and you're feeling agitated, you're able to come back down into the window of tolerance. So, you get a phone call for someone and it's upsetting. Something I would do if you're feeling like you're being ramped up, I would tell my client to put on one of their anthem songs. So a song that makes them feel calm. You can hum to it, you can dance to it. All those things, what they're going to do is they're going to either increase the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in to calm you down, or it's going to signal the vagal nerve to have more tone and, again, to calm you down. And there's the opposite. If you're feeling like you're really kind of out of it and you're just kind of spacey, then I'd have a client pick an anthem song that also brings them up, right? So then what we're doing, we're revving up the heart rate, we're engaging the sympathetic nervous system, and we're having you come back into your window of tolerance. Create safety. Create safety, meaning in the people that you're engaging with, that, create safety. That's kind of a random one, but it is. We always trying to have our clients create a safe space for themselves, right? And that you feel safe in those situations. One thing is also to be conscious of your thoughts, okay? So before you fall into like a self-destructive mode, I want you kind of pause. And so what you'd ask yourself, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired, right? Are you hungry? Am I hungry or am I thirsty? Is my body trying to tell me something? Is it telling me I need to eat, that I need to rehydrate? Angry, notice, is there something that is just disturbing you? Are you feeling stressed or angry? Lonely, when was the last time I've connected with your people in space where you feel safe and contained? Do you need to reach out for support? And tired, have you been getting enough sleep or rest? So sometimes before we kind of spew on other people or we're really getting ramped up, just pause and ask yourself, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? And just kind of go through that checklist. And then that can a lot of times mitigate just an eruption, correct? Right? And then another thing is coping thoughts. So I make a lot of my clients journal. And so some examples of coping thoughts that I have them do is I can be anxious and still deal with the situation. Just kind of write about that. My thoughts don't control my life. I do. That is something that's really important. It's notice that we're in control of our thoughts. And this is hard, but it's only temporary, right? So everything is temporary. I really hope that what you gain from this talk today is that there's a lot of hope. We can rewire, we can tone our vagal nerve, we can work with our nervous systems. If you have had histories of traumas, if you've had a recent event that's traumatic, all this can be repaired and dealt with, right? So like, again, the beginning quote was that trauma is not what happened to us, trauma is what's happening within our bodies. And we actually have control of this, and we can actually repair these things and rewire our brain and calm our nervous system. So I'm just going to end with a little thing. It's called Therapy Session from the Moon. And so change is always possible. A new day is always coming. And even in times of darkness, there is always light. So thank you very much, Masai Choi. And if anybody has any questions, I'm available.
Thank you so much, Nyree.
You're welcome, Tyra. Sorry, guys, I know I stumbled over some of my words and stuff.
I'll just quickly change their settings.
Okay. It's interesting doing it over the internet too. Can't really see anybody. Felt like I was talking to myself.
Does anyone have any questions?
It's okay if you don't. I just kind of spewed a ton. The other thing is too, is if any of you later on have questions, my email address is nhazelton, like the town, at csfs.org, and I'd be happy to send information or connect you with someone or give you resources if needed.
Hi. Can I grab the old business card? What mine? I think it was in the.
I don't seem to see any. Oh, can I email the information I shared today? Yeah, it's I wrote it all out, so absolutely I can send it. It's kind of my thoughts and things put together, but absolutely I can send aspects of it for sure.
I guess I did have a question on the epigenetics.
Yeah.
So if we can trauma alter our DNA we can be passed on, I guess?
Absolutely. I'm no expert in that at all, but it's beginning. It's a new research for sure. And what we know is that trauma will then imprint on your genes. Also, another thing that we know, so that we pass down from generation to generation. And so, which is quite interesting. But also what we know too is vagal tone is also passed down as well. So if mom is having issues in her pregnancy, say she has a lot of anxiety, she's quite depressed, you have a weaker vagal tone, and that actually is passed on to the baby. And so baby now is starting life is compromised because they have a lower vagal tone. So all this is passed down, which is pretty crazy. So it's really important that we're being active and being as healthy as we possibly can, so we can stop this being passed on to further generations.
Okay. So I guess that's everything then.
Okay. Yeah, but there's the field of trauma is expanding and changing constantly. But the good thing to know is that just living a healthy lifestyle, you're combating a bunch of it. And once again, it's like sleep, food, exercise, right? And hydration. But that's the good thing. We can repair this.